Yo, welcome back to a brand new video here on the second channel. Today we're going to be doing some meta predictions and a meta forecast for OCIC, which is actually going to be in a couple of hours. At the time of this video being recorded, OCIC is literally 4 hours away, mainly because it's in a different time zone, so it is coming like a day earlier. I thought it was going to be on Friday tomorrow, but OCIC actually does come out today, so let's get the meta predictions out of the way and what I think will be played in OCIC and how popular it'll be. Of course, OCIC, there's a lot more on the line. This is an IC, it is an international championships, meaning that you get a lot more points for doing well, the rewards are better, so it's going to be a lot heavier of a competitive environment, and I'm going to be excited to kind of see what people decide to bring to the table. I think OCIC is going to be a very crazy time, as of course, again, it is an IC after all. So we're going to get the main thing out of the way. Lugia V-Star will still be the most played deck. Now, this is Andrew Hedrick's Lugia list that won Orlando. I think Lugia, like the straightforward build here that we see, here, let me shrink this a little bit, will be the optimal way to play Lugia. Mainly because Lugia is just that good. Obviously, it's a very simple deck. The Wash Energy is the big innovation people are playing right now. Wash Energy does protect your mana fee from Sableye, which helps a lot against Kyogre. And then, of course, you do have your usual Lugia stuff. This one does play a Horn in it, and a Captured Aroma, and a Lost Vacuum, which is interesting. Bradner's list was also pretty good. It had the 3 Marnie, the 3 Research, the double Vacuum. But yeah, expect to see Lugia be the most played deck in the room. Now, there is an issue with Lugia, however, going into OCIC, and that is actually all the Lugia counters have popped back up and have performed well again. And at Orlando, a lot of the big Lugia counters from before have started to become popular, and that might make Lugia have to innovate again. We could even see the Lugia Espeon deck become popular again, and that's mainly because of the fact that Lugia is, being countered very hard right now. Of course, Ian Robb got like 10th place with Palkia with the Articunos. Ditto Control is starting to pop back into the mix. So people are really starting to tech for Lugia again and playing all the Lugia counters again, meaning that you might have to start playing Espeon VMAX again, as how popular we are seeing the Lugia counters pop back up. Because once Lugia becomes really good again and people, start, respecting the ways people counter Lugia, then that's when the counters pop back up. And with the popularity of Amazing Destruction Yveltal or Cry Destruction Yveltal, and of course Articuno becoming popular again, it might be time for Lugia to play Espeon again. So I actually could see Espeon seen playing Lugia once again, because people might have to start running it to counter the counters that people are playing for Lugia. Now, it's interesting because Articuno, and we'll get to that when we get there, but Articuno and Yveltal both being very popular, that's the thing. Will they be popular? Will people just assume Lugia already prepared for them? Because the Lugia counters did decently well in Orlando, that might turn people away from wanting to play them to OCIC, because now the Lugia players are going to be ready for the counters, and something like Espeon could pop back up in Lugia lists. But of course, we got to talk about Lostbox. Lostbox is still as good as ever. The highest performing Lostbox deck, of course, was played by Nicholas Moffat, who played the Rayquaza deck to top 4 in Orlando. Lostbox just seems really, really good, obviously. The Rayquaza build is the one that a lot of people say is the worst build that is popular, but it's the one that's been doing the best. I don't think we've even seen a Kyogre deck in top 8 yet, which is kind of surprising. But yeah, Rayquaza is still really, really good. Nicholas's deck here is pretty straightforward. It does play the Wash Energy Ice Cube combo, which I do like. Ice Cube is actually, in my opinion, going to be very popular in OCIC, because it hard counters Regis. It's really good against Lostbox. Not that many Lostbox decks respect the Ice Cube. There's a few ways people, try to counter Ice Cube. I've seen some Lost Zone decks play the Giratina V, just so you can use Shred to one-shot Ice Cube. Obviously, Dragonite can attack Ice Cube, but it only does 50 damage. So Ice Cube seems pretty primed right now in the meta, and we might even see a lot of Ice Cube in OCIC. In my opinion, I think we will. Of course, we have that Ice Cube Yveltal control deck that Azul's group brought to Orlando. So Ice Cube definitely becoming popular, and I think Lostbox has to, start playing a way to counter Ice Cube, because I genuinely expect to see a lot of Ice Cube in OCIC. So at the very least, Ice Cube will perform well, of course, as Sander plays it. So I definitely think that Lostbox is going to have to innovate to deal with Ice Cube. And again, I think something like Giratina V could be a really good counter to Ice Cube, where Giratina V can just do 160 damage, shred, knock out the Ice Cube. But that's not the only Lostbox deck I want to talk about. That's going to be the Turbo Lostbox deck. Now, this deck is kind of crazy. The idea of the deck is to actually get a turn 1 Mirage Gate off in a lot of scenarios. We even saw this on stream, I think, against Diego, where the player was able to get a turn 1 Dragonite KO on a Lugia V, a lone Lugia V, and Diego just immediately scooped the game up. So this like turbo Lostbox deck might actually get more legs. It's kind of it's an annoying deck because like it can turn off, like when you pull off a turn 1 Mirage Gate, it's kind of crazy. And as you can see, the list is just straightforward. It's literally just 4 Colress. The idea of the deck is to try to get a fast Mirage Gate going and put on a lot of pressure. Of course, it does still play that late game Kyogre for that late game potential when you need it. But yeah, this this Turbo Lostbox deck seems pretty good and might actually be experimented with more going into OCIC. Wouldn't be surprised if we saw a couple of these Turbo Lostbox decks do well. Maybe even we'll see one on stream once again, because it is kind of crazy when it gets a turn 1 Mirage Gate. It's actually very, very scary when it does. Then we got to talk about Mew. Now, this is the highest placing Mew deck in Orlando. It did play the Aerodactyl V-Star, and it played other things like Big Charm and Leafy Camo Poncho. But the point is, Mew is still going to be very good in the meta. And I think Mew is still very popular, mainly because it's just Mew at the end of the day, right? Mew is just basically going to do Mew things. A lot of people really are just kind of glued on to Mew. People just really want to play it. And Mew, while it does technically keep getting cards that counter it, Mew is still just a really good deck. And a lot of people are just devoted to playing Mew. And I think that the Aerodactyl Mew deck may or may not be the best way to play it, but Aerodactyl is something that people have been testing with. Obviously, Manaphy has been seen play in the Mew deck too, as a pretty good counter to the Kyogre deck. So we'll have to see how Mew ends up performing. I'm not sure the Aerodactyl build is the way to go, but I do think that we'll see Mew do well, of course, in OCIC. Doesn't take a genius to predict that. We got about Regis, my baby Regis. Now, Regis is in a good spot. It didn't do that well in Orlando. Like, it didn't do well enough in Orlando for people to respect it. The only problem with Regis is the popularity of IceQ. I think IceQ's popularity is the only thing that might turn a few people away from wanting to play Regis. I also think that there's other problems, like Guja might still be lurking out there. But Regis, I still think, is a pretty solid deck in the meta, because I think it just has really good matchups across the board. And I think that Regis now has to start playing the Yellhorn again in order to counter IceQ. I think if you're going to play Regis in OCIC, you have to play a Yellhorn, because otherwise you're just not going to be able to beat IceQ. And you don't want to take an L to IceQ, especially with that control deck becoming popular now. And a lot of people are really starting to kind of innovate on the control deck. So I really think you have to play that team Yellhorn, because it's just too good not to have against IceQ. Like, if your opponent goes low on IceQ, you just drop the Yellhorn on them, and it's just basically GG's at that point. So the Yellhorn definitely is going to have to be played in Regis again, in my opinion. I think you still want to play the Lost Vacuum too. I think Lost Vacuum is still really, really good in Regis. I think you still have to play Lost Vacuum, because Lost Vacuum is really good against Paracel. And if you want to have a chance against Flying Pikachu, which Flying Pikachu Lugia is still doing well, you probably have to play the Vacuum. I think Vacuum and Yellhorn are the two big cards Reggie has to play in OCIC in order to do well. Next up, of course, is Palkia. Palkia is basically good again, thanks to Ian Rob's Palkia list performing well in Orlando. Palkia is in a weird spot, though. The gimmick of Palkia is how you can beat the meta with it. I mean, as you can see here, we got the Crabominable. I know you can't really see that because my webcam is in the way. You got the Crabominable V. You have the double Articuno. The Articuno is like the big card I think Palkia kind of gets. I think without Articuno, Palkia would probably just not be able to beat Lugia, to be honest. Articuno is very, very important to have in Palkia. It's one of the ways you beat Lugia, but now that Articuno is kind of back in popularity, and of course we also got to talk about Yveltal too, this might make Articuno a lot more worse going into OCIC, but Palkia is still a really good deck. It's still a very strong deck. The Inteleon engine is still really strong. It does also get the ability to play an IceQ in the deck, so it does have a win condition against Lostbox and Regis. Well, it does get to play IceQ. And the Crabominable, I think, is still very good against Duraludon and Guja. I think the Crabominable still has to see play in Palkia in this tournament, because it's just really good against Guja and Duraludon, and I think those decks will still see play, which we'll talk about when we get there. But yeah, Palkia still seems to be pretty good. We'll have to see how Ian Rob's kind of list adapts to the format. Articuno still seems okay. Obviously, there will be the unexpected Lugia player in OCIC that will be like, I'm not going to tech for Articuno or Yveltal, and then they just get bodied by the Articuno. So we'll have to see where that goes. But I definitely would expect to see Palkia still perform well. I do think we're going to see at least one Palkia like almost make top 8, in my opinion. I think it's just that good of a deck. And if it's piloted by the right player, because this is a bit of a higher skill ceiling deck to play, I think we could see Palkia perform pretty well in OCIC. Then we got to talk about the Control deck. Control is in a really interesting spot. Now, some would argue Control's in a worse spot going into OCIC because now everybody knows Control and how it works. Obviously, you have the Eldegoss loop. A lot of decks are going to start teching for Eldegoss. Duraludon and Guja might start innovating choice belts in their deck to counter the Eldegoss Cape loop. Obviously, Yveltal could be countered. Of course, Lugia might start playing the counters to the Yveltal and Articuno with like Espeon, and this could cause Yveltal to be less relevant in the Lugia matchup. Though this deck could always play like Path the Peak. And then, of course, the Ice Cube Snorlax is still kind of good. Obviously, Thornton Ice Cube is still pretty deadly. The problem is once again, I think Regis is going to start playing Yellhorn again, and I think Lostbox is going to start playing some kind of way to deal with Ice Cube. Again, I really think that Giratina Shred is going to be popular because Giratina can just shred through the Ice Cube, no problem. So we'll have to see how Control does. In my opinion, this Ice Cube Control deck is still like an okay play, but I really do think that people are going to start countering it. Again, I think people are going to start checking for the Control matchup now that it's done well and it's gained popularity. Of course, Choice Belt, Espeon VMAX, Shred Attackers, and Lostbox Yellhorn are all things this deck has to watch out for, and I think that this deck will be countered, though they could always adapt to the meta, and I think Sander, obviously no surprise, Sander's probably going to bring some crazy Control deck that we've never seen before, or he's going to innovate on this Control Thornton combo and make it even better than it already was. So yeah, definitely Control's in a weird spot. I personally, if I were to play it, I probably wouldn't play it because I do think that it's very easy to counter right now. Again, if you just play like Belt near Guja deck or Duraludon deck, or you play an Espeon, this deck's probably pretty easy to counter. And then, of course, we have Arc Dura. Good old Arc Dura. It doesn't really do anything. It doesn't really change. It doesn't really move any needle. It's just kind of just a deck people play because it's Arc Dura. I don't know if we're going to see an Arc Dura in top 8. Probably not. I think there's going to be a couple that perform well. I mean, Arc Dura is what it is. It has a pretty good matchup spread, but also a bad matchup spread. I don't think it has a good Mew matchup, and I also don't even know if it even beats Lugia anymore. Most lists are, very heavily playing 3 Paracel, which you kind of have to play, of course. The problem with Arc Dura is that it's good, but it loses pretty badly to Yveltal, which is a big issue. Yveltal is a huge problem for Arc Dura. But, we'll have to see how Arc Dura does. I think Arc Dura probably has to play Choice Belt. As you can see, this list does play it because you do have to counter the Control matchup because the Eldegoss Cape loop can be very tough to beat. And then, of course, we have Arc variants. Now, I want to talk about Arceus here because Arceus is in a weird spot. This is the highest placing Arceus box deck from Orlando. And it is basically the Arceus, Pikachu, Aerodactyl, Empoleon, Espeon deck from before. The deck's pretty straightforward in what it does. I think it's still a pretty decent archetype. My issue with Arceus is that I don't know if it beats Lugia going second. That's why I've always been turned away from wanting to play Arceus myself, because I don't think it has a good Lugia matchup at all. Other than if you go first, you get a turn Aerodactyl, it's good. But if you don't go first and get a turn Aerodactyl, the deck is probably pretty bad. But Arceus is still kind of chugging along, doing its own thing. I think Arceus is still good. I think it has good matchups across the board, and I think it just takes like a really awkward matchup to Lugia. Again, if you can win the coin flip and go first, the Lugia matchup isn't as bad, but it just seems like Lugia going second is just almost unwinnable for Arceus because it just is really tough. Unless they're, for whatever reason, not playing Dunsparce in their deck, the Lugia matchup is like almost unwinnable. And I don't know if I can trust how bad the Lugia matchup is to want to play an Arceus deck myself. But Arceus is still pretty strong in my opinion. I think it's still worth playing. I think that it takes good matchups across the board. Of course, Flying Pikachu is really good against Lostbox and Regis. And even Palkia. Palkia getting a bit of a resurgence in popularity is one of the reasons why I actually think we could see an Arceus Pikachu deck perform well. Because again, the continued popularity of Palkia might end up causing the Pikachu to be good again. It's not like a guaranteed win against Palkia or anything. Just because you have Pikachu doesn't mean you're like auto-winning the Palkia matchup. It just means that your Palkia matchup becomes even more favored because you have Flying Pikachu. If you're playing Espeon or Big Paracel, you probably have a pretty good time into the Articuno, which is one way they could try to beat your Pikachus to paralyze you. But if you have like, a Switch or you have the Espeon or Paracel in your deck, you probably don't have to worry too much about Articuno. But yeah, Flying Pikachu does seem to be a pretty good call going into OCIC, because we might see Palkia kind of get caught in the crossfire of Pikachu. And then, of course, we have Guja. Guja is a weird deck. A lot of people say this deck is bad. Some people say it's good. I mean, it did decent in Orlando. I personally didn't play against a single one. In all 15 of my rounds, I hit 0 Guja, which is hilarious. Guja's okay. I don't know if it really moves the needle going into OCIC. it might be an underdog deck, to be honest, because a lot of people just don't respect it. They're not going to care about it, which means Guja could end up performing well. It's still not a terrible deck. I don't know if it really, once again, can beat stuff like Lugia and Mew, but the deck is still solid nonetheless. I think you have to play a Belt in your deck if you want to beat the Eldegoss deck. You have, like, the Galarian Zigzagoon, I guess, but I think it's still worth it to just play, like, a couple Belt in your Guja deck, just so you can use the Belt against the Eldegoss loop combo. Other than that, you got yourself a pretty solid Guja deck. Not sure about the Cheryl, though. The Cheryl might be cuttable, but overall, this was the highest placing Guja deck in Orlando, is why I included it. There's a couple others. One of my friends on the Team Shelf Squad played Ice Cube, Thornton, Cheryl in their deck to try to really tech it out. And if you want to try out like a Guja Ice Cube combo, you definitely could. I don't know if you really need it, because Guja already beats the matchup that Ice Cube's good in. Like, it already Guja should be able to beat Rayquaza, even though you can, like, Rock Sand spam. It should obviously auto-win Regis. I don't know if you really need the Ice Cube, but definitely Guja seems to be still decent. It's kind of like not a safe pick, but kind of like a deck that if you don't really know what to play, Guja isn't the worst deck to sleeve up, if you catch what I'm saying. Next up is Eternatus, another deck that is really slept on. This is Orion, Ela's highest placing list in Orlando, using the Eternatus VMAX here, which is a deck that I've actually been talking to Orion about playing myself, because I actually really like the deck. I think that it's actually pretty good. Weezing's a pretty strong card, in my opinion. Do not deny the power of Weezing. Like, if you're expecting to hit Lostbox, play Weezing. It's actually pretty good. But, yeah, this Eternatus Weezing deck might do well in OCIC. I don't think it'll make, like, top 8, but I definitely think we might see a couple in top 16, or at least one in top 16, because it's still, like, a pretty solid deck overall. It's an underrated deck. Not many people really expect it. Like, if Eternatus was popular, people would play, like, Galarian Zapdos Vs in their Lostbox decks, which nobody is. So, like, Etern's popular. The only issue Etern might face is, like, Aerodactyl being popular might be a problem. Like, against that Arceus deck, and against, like, even Mew, if they're playing a way to attack with Aerodactyl. And, of course, Vegavolt is another deck that still plays Aerodactyl. And who knows what other wacky decks pop up that'll play Aerodactyl. This could obviously cause issues for Eternatus VMAX. But overall, Etern's kind of a sleeper pick. Nobody really techs for it. It can cheese wins really easily with Weezing just being a very, very good card. I think it's definitely a pretty solid deck. Next up is Ditto Control. So we're kind of getting to, like, not the rogues, but more of, like, the underslept on decks. We got Ditto Control. This was a Ditto Control deck from Orlando that did well, playing the Ditto with the Eviltals, and interesting enough, having other attackers like Jinx, which is really good to confuse your opponent, Sandile to build, Morpeko, which is pretty good against, like, Pikachu, and then Ice Cube, and even the new Calyrex here with King's Destruction, or Instruction, allowing you to do 30 damage, and then search your deck for up to 2 cards, put them in your hand. So really cool control card there. Ditto Control seems like a really cool concept. Honestly, I think it might be better than the straight Eviltal control build, because you're kind of like an all-in-one package deck, because you get to play, like, the Ice Cube, but you also get other cards to work with, which is kind of the problem with the Ice Cube deck. The Ice Cube deck is very linear in what it does. It has a very straightforward and simple win condition, whereas the Ditto build here has a lot more room for different win cons. Of course, you have, like, Sandile, the Mill, the Morpeko can be really good. You have the Jinx, which can be annoying against Lugia. Like, this deck seems a lot better, in my opinion, going into OCIC. So definitely we could see somebody play a Ditto Control. I don't think it'll make top 8 or anything, but I definitely think a Ditto Control deck might even get showed on stream because it does well in the tournament. I really like the idea of Ditto Control. I think it has a lot more, like, room and, avenues to do well compared to the other decks. Then, of course, we got to look at the Arceus Vulpix deck. This is a bit of a weird one to include. It's a deck that did well in the late night, and I've been actually kind of on the Vulpix idea, and I think I said this before. I've actually almost played Vulpix, a very similar list to this, actually, to Orlando myself. My build played an Aerodactyl in it, but Vulpix is a really cool card because it's pretty good against Guja. It forces them to use Baby Guja, which you can try to out-tank with V-Guard or Hyper Potion. But yeah, no, I really like the idea of Arceus, Pikachu, Vulpix. I don't think it's a bad deck. Vulpix can also beat Mew because you can go Drapion and then Vulpix's V-Star power against Mew. But yeah, I'm hoping to maybe see, like, an Arceus, Pikachu, Vulpix deck. Again, I think Arc Pika is actually primed to be in a good spot going into OCIC. We just have to kind of see how the deck is played, like whether you play with Aerodactyl and Espeon, or you play with Vulpix, or you just play like an Arc Pika deck. Like, I don't know. I just think Arc Pika is just in a good spot going into Orlando, or OCIC, sorry. And I really wanted to kind of note that Arc Pika doesn't seem bad going into OCIC. And I just wanted to kind of note that here real quick, because it doesn't seem like a bad deck whatsoever. And then we got to talk about Vegavolt. Vegavolt is a weird deck. It's in a weird spot right now where a lot of people just say that it's bad. But honestly, it's one of those decks that can still kind of pop off and do well. There's also a Vegavolt Palkia deck that's pretty solid too. That also also, I think, did pretty good in Orlando, so maybe I could have included the Vegavolt Palkia deck in this discussion, too. That's the deck I've actually been looking into playing myself. But yeah, no, Vegavolt is still decent, of course. Aerodactyl is still a very good card into Lugia meta, and if Lugia is still going to be played, and Lugia is not teching for Aerodactyl anymore, most Lugia lists probably won't play Cologne, especially if they're going to try to counter the Eviltals and the Articunos and go back to playing Espeon. This could make Aerodactyl even stronger. And of course, Vegavolt can be good against Lostbox. Raikou is good. The deck, of course, did gain that Skyseal Stone, which is kind of like the big card this deck got access to, is Skyseal Stone. Combination with Raikou and Drapion, you can get some pretty easy, cheesy KOs against stuff like Mew. So definitely, Vegavolt doesn't seem to be in a bad spot right now in the meta. I think we might see a Vegavolt deck in top 8. I think that it's still in a good spot. Of course, again, Skyseal Stone, it's just really, really good, in my opinion. And I guess that goes back to like the Turbo Lostbox deck, where it's like, Raikou V seems pretty good with the Skyseal Stone. That's 2 different Raikou decks right now. So who knows? We might see some explosive emergence of Skyseal Stone. But I'd be interested to see how OCIC looks. Again, OCIC is literally in like, well, by the time this uploads, in like 3 hours from now. So I'm definitely excited to see what people bring to the table at OCIC. Again, it's an international championship. It's going to be crazy. There's a lot more on the line. So it's going to be cool to see what people bring to OCIC and how people innovate the format. And yeah, that'll be it. If y'all enjoyed the video here on the second channel, leave a like. If you're new to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We actually just cracked 3,000 subs yesterday, so I want to thank you all for 3,000 subscribers here on the second channel. Hope you all have been enjoying the content. I know I've been pushing out a lot of post-rotation content, but I'm going to try to make more non-post-row content, but I definitely still want to pump up the post-row content. I know y'all do enjoy the post-row content nonetheless, but I feel like I don't want to like just shove it down your throats. But hope y'all enjoyed the content and all that good stuff. Thanks for watching. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll probably catch y'all on the OCIC stream. Peace out.